The news reached her on a warm afternoon that felt too calm for a life-changing moment. The letter had been sitting in her mailbox for a day, maybe two, because she rarely checked it anymore. Life had been busy in small, ordinary ways, and she never expected anything important to arrive through ordinary mail. But when she opened the envelope and saw the official stamp, her breath caught. It said she had inherited a ranch she barely remembered, a place her relatives had waved off as worthless land that held nothing but dust and stubborn memories. She stood in her small apartment, holding that letter as the room suddenly felt too quiet. She was 22 with more questions than answers and the kind of uncertainty that made her fingertips tingle. She reread the lines again and again until the words settled inside her like a steady drum. A ranch left behind by a grandfather no one talked about, sitting on land her family insisted had no value. Still, something in her chest nudged her forward. She tried to call her mother for clarity, but the reaction she received brought no comfort. Her mother only sighed and told her there must be some mistake. She said the property was too far out, too old, too broken, and she should not waste her time. Her voice carried an edge that felt less like concern and more like something unspoken. That made her even more curious. The next morning she packed a small bag, filled her old truck with fuel, and set out on the long road that led into open country. The deeper she drove, the wider the world became. Rolling fields stretched far beyond the fence lines, and the sky seemed almost close enough to touch. The land around her felt like it had its own heartbeat. She kept thinking about how her family dismissed this ranch as if it were nothing but a forgotten patch of dirt. She wondered why they never talked about the place and why the inheritance had landed on her shoulders alone. By noon the sun was bright above her, and dust lifted in soft waves behind the tires. She followed the directions until the dirt road narrowed and bent around a stand of tall cottonwoods. Her heart raced when she saw the fence posts leaning at tired angles and a gate hanging from one hinge. Beyond it stood the ranch house. The roof was missing a few shingles, one window looked cracked from a storm long past, and the porch sagged slightly in the middle. Still, there was something about it that made her feel drawn closer. She stepped out of the truck, breathing in the scent of warm earth and wild grass, and for the first time she felt the weight of the inheritance settle in a new way. Not as a burden, as a beginning. Inside the house the air smelled like wood that had held memories for too long. Dust floated gently in the sunlight coming through the open door. She walked from room to room, touching the edges of old furniture left behind and noticing small things that hinted at life once lived. A hat hung on a hook. A half-finished carving sat near the window. A folded blanket rested on the back of a chair, its fabric faded but still soft. She felt as if someone had stepped out only moments before. The silence carried history. She spent the next hours exploring the property. There was an old barn not far from the house, its doors slightly open. When she pushed them aside, the light spilled across stalls filled with leftover straw. There was a saddle hanging on the wall, carefully kept, as if someone had planned to return. She found horse tracks near the back pasture, faint but present, and she wondered if wild horses still wandered near the ridge. The land had a quiet strength to it, the kind of strength her family never mentioned. As she walked along the fence line, she felt a growing sense of connection. Every gust of wind carried the scent of sage and the sound of distant birds. The ranch felt like it was waiting for someone who would truly see it. She felt a pull deep inside as if this place wanted to show her something. The idea made her smile even though she did not fully understand it. When evening came, she sat on the porch with a simple meal and watched the colors stretch across the horizon. The sky shifted from gold to crimson before settling into a calm blue that slowly faded into night. She felt a mix of excitement and unease. Her family had insisted this ranch held nothing of worth, yet something about that claim felt wrong. She could not shake the feeling that they had hidden something. That thought lingered like a soft ember inside her. She spent her first night in the old house, wrapped in a blanket she brought from the truck. The air was cool and filled with the sound of crickets. In the stillness she felt a presence she could not name. Not a person, not a shadow, but a sense that the land itself held stories she had not yet uncovered. She fell asleep thinking about the long history of ranchers, the challenges they faced, the secrets they carried, and how many of those secrets were buried beneath years of dust and silence. Morning came with the cry of a hawk soaring overhead. She stepped outside, stretching, and noticed something she had missed before. A faint path behind the barn leading toward a line of low hills. It was overgrown, almost swallowed by grass. She felt a spark of curiosity and decided to follow it. The ground was uneven, and the air felt heavier as she moved farther from the house. She did not know what she expected to find, yet her steps quickened. The path led to a small shed hidden by brush. Its door was locked, and the wood looked untouched for many years. She bent to examine it and saw initials carved into the frame. They were old and weathered, but clear enough to recognize. They belonged to her grandfather. Her pulse quickened. Why would her family never mention this place if he had kept something so intentionally hidden? She stepped back, scanning the area. For a moment she felt the weight of the silence around her. The shed looked ordinary from the outside, yet the more she stared at it, the more she felt something significant rested within its walls. She suddenly felt that familiar pull again, as if the land itself urged her to look deeper. She returned to the house and searched through drawers until she found a ring of keys. One of them looked old enough to match the lock. She hurried back to the shed, brushing away the dust that had collected around the handle. Her hand trembled slightly as she fitted the key into place. She turned it, and the lock clicked with a sound that seemed louder than the wind. She opened the door just enough for a sliver of sunlight to slip inside. The air was cold and smelled like forgotten years. She hesitated. Something inside told her that once she stepped into that shed, she would uncover something her family kept buried for reasons she was only beginning to understand. She could feel it in the space around her, in the quiet hum of the land, in the way her breath caught in her throat. She took a single step forward and felt the world shift in a small yet powerful way. The floor creaked beneath her boots, and the shadows stretched long across the room. She could not yet see what was in the far corner, but she sensed it. A discovery waiting in the dark, ready to change everything she thought she knew about her family, her inheritance, and herself. She lifted her lantern slightly, ready to reveal whatever was hidden, unaware that what she was about to uncover would move hearts in ways she never imagined. She held her breath as the lantern's glow pushed back the shadows inside the shed. The beam was soft at first, trembling in her hand, but it slowly brightened the room enough for her to see dust floating like tiny specks of memory. The air felt colder here than outside, as if whatever had been kept in this space held its own kind of stillness. She stepped farther in, her boots making the wooden floor complain beneath her weight. Each creak pulled her nerves tighter. The shed was small, but shelves lined the walls from end to end. Most of them held old tools, jars of nails, cracked leather straps, and pieces of harness that looked like they belonged to another lifetime. Yet her attention was drawn to a trunk pushed against the back of the room. It was not large, but it had a certain weight to it, a weight that felt more emotional than physical. The surface was covered in dust, and part of the wood looked worn, as if someone had opened it many times before. She knelt beside it, feeling a slow rush of anticipation she could not push away. She placed the lantern next to her and brushed away the dust with her hand. The smell of old wood rose up, mixed with something familiar yet distant. She grasped the metal latch and lifted it. The sound of the latch opening echoed in the tight space, making her shoulders tense. When she opened the trunk, she found stacks of journals, each tied with aging twine. Her breath caught again. The handwriting on the covers belonged to her grandfather. She lifted the top journal with careful hands, feeling the weight of paper that held years she never knew. She opened it, and the first page revealed dates from decades back. The writing was steady, with long strokes that suggested patience. She read only a few lines before stopping. The words spoke about the ranch, but not as a simple piece of land. Her grandfather described it with emotion, calling it a place of quiet hope and hidden burdens. He wrote about challenges he faced, neighbors who depended on him, and a promise he had made long ago. She felt an ache in her chest as she realized how much she never knew about him. She placed the journal aside and lifted another. This one was thicker. When she opened it, the tone shifted. Her grandfather wrote about conflict within the family, disagreements that stretched far deeper than she imagined. He spoke of a decision he made that caused a divide between him and the rest of them, though he never described the decision clearly. He only wrote that he could not let the truth become a legacy of bitterness. That line alone made her heart pound. She closed the journal and sat back on the floor, pressing her palms against her knees. The knowledge that her family had kept all this from her left her both angry and curious. Why had no one mentioned these journals, this shed, this part of her heritage? Why had they dismissed the ranch so quickly, as if it held nothing but broken fences? She did not have answers yet, but she felt herself stepping closer to a truth her family had tried to bury. She spent nearly an hour exploring the shed further. In the corner, she found a wooden crate filled with small items wrapped in cloth. When she opened one of the bundles, she found a silver spur with initials carved on the back. Another cloth revealed a hand-carved wooden horse, its details so fine she could almost see the personality carved into its eyes. She felt a connection to these objects, as though each one whispered a small piece of the past. When she stepped outside, the sun had climbed high, warming the yard and brushing gold tones across the land. The silence around the shed felt different now. Before it held a quiet warning, but now it carried anticipation. She turned toward the house and felt something shift within her. She had thought the ranch was just an unexpected inheritance. Now she knew it was much more. It held secrets, memories, and maybe even answers to questions she never realized she needed to ask. She carried the first journal back to the house and set it on the kitchen table. Dust still covered the surface, but she did not mind. She poured herself a glass of water, sat down, and flipped through a few more pages. Her grandfather described long days working with horses, mending fences, and riding across the property to check on cattle. He wrote about storms he overcame, droughts that pushed the land too far, and moments of peace where he felt the ranch breathe with him. His words painted a picture that made her feel as if she had stepped into his world. But mixed within the simple notes were small hints of something deeper. He mentioned people arriving late at night seeking help. He wrote about protecting the ranch from outsiders who were not welcome. He wrote about meetings held in secret, agreements made in the barn or under the cottonwoods, decisions that weighed on him. Each journal seemed to hold its own tone, and she could sense a growing tension in the words as the years went on. She looked around the quiet kitchen and wondered how much the old house had witnessed. The walls held so many untold stories. She realized she had stepped into a journey far more complex than she expected. The ranch was not just a piece of land passed down to her. It was a legacy, one mixed with hardship, hope, and secrets her family did not want revisited. Later in the afternoon, she decided to explore beyond the main property to understand the land better. She saddled one of the ranch's remaining horses, a gentle bay gelding she found in the pasture the previous day. Though thin and older, he moved with a calm spirit that gave her confidence. She named him quietly to herself, though she did not say it aloud yet, wanting to protect the fragile bond she felt forming. As she rode out, she noticed how large the ranch truly was. Open fields stretched into rolling hills, and beyond them a narrow creek snaked through the valley. The more she traveled, the more she realized how much her grandfather had cared for this land. Every fence line had been set with intention. Every gate faced the wind in a way that protected it. The ranch felt like a living journal of his choices. She followed the creek for a long distance before noticing something unusual. In one area, the ground near the water had shifted. It looked as if someone had dug there recently, though not within the last few days. Grass grew unevenly, and small stones were scattered in a way that did not match the rest of the bank. She dismounted and knelt near the disturbed earth. Her fingertips brushed the soil, and she felt a chill rise through her. She looked around, trying to make sense of what she saw. There were no footprints or signs of tools, but the ground had definitely been moved. It did not feel natural. She wondered if her grandfather wrote anything about this place in his journals. She had only read a portion so far, but the tone of the pages suggested he had been guarding something. Maybe this part of the land held a clue to that. As she stood again, the horse shifted its weight and released a soft breath. She placed her hand on its neck, grateful for the steady presence. She scanned the area once more before deciding to continue riding. She needed a clearer picture before jumping to conclusions, but the thought lingered. Something had happened here. something her family did not want brought to light. She rode toward the hills next. The path grew narrow and rocky, but the horse handled it well. From the ridge she could see the entire ranch stretching in every direction. The wind swept through her hair as she tried to understand why her family had cut ties with this land so sharply. She wondered if the ranch reminded them of a truth they did not want to revisit. When she returned to the house later, the sun was beginning to set. She fed the horse, brushed its coat, and closed the barn doors gently. Inside the house she lit a small lamp and opened another journal. This one held entries written during a difficult year. Her grandfather spoke of losing people he trusted, of standing firm in decisions that made him unpopular, and of holding on to something he refused to name. His words felt heavier here, filled with emotion that hovered between fear and determination. As she read deeper into the night, she realized she was slowly being pulled into the heart of a mystery she could no longer ignore. The ranch, with its quiet fields and worn fences, carried a story that reached beyond simple inheritance. It carried a past that had shaped her family in ways they refused to speak of. And now she stood at the edge of uncovering it, unaware of how deeply it would change her life, and how much more the ranch planned to reveal. The next morning arrived with a strange quietness over the ranch, the kind that made her feel as if something waited just beyond the edge of sight. She woke before the sun fully rose, unable to shake the restless thoughts that had gathered through the night. Her grandfather's journals lay spread across the kitchen table, each one open to pages marked with emotion, warnings, and unfinished sentences. She stared at them while drinking a cup of coffee that had gone cold too quickly, her mind circling the same questions again. Why had he kept so many secrets, and why had the rest of the family pushed the ranch away as if it carried bad luck? She stepped outside to clear her thoughts. The morning air smelled of hay and damp earth. The gelding she had ridden the day before stood by the fence, watching her with thoughtful eyes. She approached him, brushing her hand down his neck. His calm presence grounded her. She whispered thanks under her breath, though she still hadn't spoken the name she'd chosen for him. She saddled him and rode out again, feeling driven by something she could not explain. She returned to the creek bank where she had seen disturbed soil, hoping daylight would offer her more clarity. The ground looked the same as before, uneven and out of place, but in the daylight she noticed faint lines forming a rough square. Her heart beat faster. It didn't look like a natural shift. It looked deliberate. She knelt again, touching the soil with more intention this time. The earth was loose in the top layer but tightly packed beneath, as if someone had buried something but tried to make it look untouched. She stood up and scanned the land around her, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. Although the ranch was far from any main road, the thought of someone hiding something here unsettled her. The journals kept circling in her head. Her grandfather had written countless entries about responsibility, protection, and loyalty. He talked about safeguarding the ranch through storms and hardship, but he also hinted at threats he never named. She wondered if this place was connected to those entries. She rode farther upstream, hoping to distract herself, but her thoughts kept drifting back. She didn't know who she could trust or even who she could ask for answers. Her family had made it clear they had no interest in the ranch or its past. Whatever had happened here, they wanted it buried. When she returned to the house, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. On the inside of the barn door, carved faintly into the wood, were initials. They matched the initials etched into the silver spur she had found in the shed. Her grandfather's initials. She traced them with her finger, feeling a strange mix of sadness and pride. He had built so much with his own hands. She wondered if he had left these markings intentionally, hoping one day someone would follow the trail. That afternoon she took one of the journals outside and sat near the cottonwood trees. She opened to a section she had skimmed but not fully read. These entries were written during a difficult season. The handwriting appeared more hurried and the words held more tension. He wrote about someone who had come to the ranch looking for him, a person he described as dangerous and determined. He did not explain what the conflict was about, only that he had to protect what mattered. He mentioned the creek once, saying he had done what needed to be done near the water. She closed the journal slowly. A knot formed in her stomach. The disturbed patch of soil kept pulling at her thoughts. She wondered if her grandfather had hidden something important there, something that had pushed him to secrecy. But she also wondered if he had left it for someone to find eventually, or if it was supposed to remain buried forever. Her head felt crowded with unanswered questions, and she found herself walking back to the shed. She lit the lantern again and searched the shelves more carefully. Behind the crates and hanging straps, she found a small metal lockbox tucked beneath a folded tarp. She pulled it out, surprised by its weight. When she tried the latch, it opened easily, as if it had not been touched in years. Inside, she found a folded map of the ranch. Her breath froze as she studied it. The map was hand-drawn, labeled in her grandfather's writing. Several spots were circled, including the creek. Another marked area sat deep in the hills where she had not ridden yet. Next to the circled places were short phrases, written lightly as if he feared anyone else reading them. One circle had the note, "Keep safe." Another said only when needed. Her pulse quickened. She felt like she had stepped into a trail he had laid out long before she was born, one he meant someone like her to follow. The map raised more questions than answers, but now she had direction. She folded it carefully and slipped it into her jacket pocket. Just as she turned to leave the shed, she heard a sound outside. A soft crunch of gravel, too heavy to be from a small animal. She froze. The ranch had been quiet for days. She stepped to the window and peeked out. Nothing moved. The yard was still, the barn in plain sight. She waited, listening to the wind brushing past the fence. No other sound came. Still, the moment unsettled her enough to check around the house before returning inside. As night settled in, she could not shake the sense of being watched. She locked the doors, something her grandfather probably never had to do. She sat at the kitchen table again, with the map spread before her. The lamplight flickered as she studied it, tracing the lines with her finger. The marked location in the hills drew her attention the most. It was placed between two rock formations she had seen from a distance but never approached. She read through the journals again, searching for more clues. One entry stood out. Her grandfather had written about a meeting that took place near the rocks. He spoke of arguments, decisions made under pressure, and a promise he swore to keep. The entry ended abruptly, leaving her with a sense of unease. She couldn't ignore it. The creek, the rocks, the lockbox, the disturbed soil. Everything pointed to a story deeper than one man's quiet life on a ranch. She wondered if she had inherited more than land. Maybe she had inherited a responsibility, one her family had chosen to abandon. As she prepared for bed, she told herself she would go to the hills in the morning. She needed to know what her grandfather had circled on that map. She needed to understand what he had been protecting all those years. But as she lay under the covers, unable to sleep, the unsettling crunch she heard earlier replayed in her mind. She wondered if she was truly alone on this land, or if someone else already knew she had begun uncovering the past. What she did not know yet was that her arrival at the ranch had stirred old dust that someone hoped would stay buried. And the deeper she searched, the closer she came to a hidden truth that had waited far too long to be discovered. She woke before first light with a strange heaviness in her chest, as if the ranch itself had whispered that this day would matter. The air inside the house felt tighter than usual, a quiet tension pressing against the walls. She sat up slowly, listening to the faint rustle of wind slipping under the door. For a moment she thought she heard footsteps outside, but when she held her breath to listen again, the sound was gone. She got dressed quickly and folded the map into her pocket. The gelding waited near the fence, shifting his weight as though aware something significant lay ahead. She saddled him and stroked the side of his neck to calm herself as much as him. The sun was just beginning to color the sky when she mounted up and started toward the hills marked on the map. Her heart paced faster with each step the horse took across the quiet land. As she approached the ridge line, the earth changed under the gelding's hooves. The open fields gave way to rougher ground sprinkled with rocks and brush. She felt the horse tighten beneath her as if he sensed something unusual ahead. She slowed to let him pick his way between the stones. The morning air hung cold, carrying a dry smell that reminded her of drought seasons mentioned in her grandfather's journals. The two rock formations finally appeared in the distance, rising like silent sentinels above the hills. She had seen them from afar before, but up close they looked heavier, almost watchful. She pulled the map from her pocket to confirm she was heading toward the right spot. The circled area sat directly between the rocks. Her grandfather's handwriting looked firmer on this part of the map, as if he knew these markings mattered more than the others. When she reached the base of the first rock, she dismounted and tied the reins loosely so the gelding could graze. She walked forward slowly, scanning the ground for anything out of place. The dirt here felt different beneath her boots, harder and more compact. She checked behind the rocks, running her hand along the rough surface, feeling for markings or carvings. She didn't know exactly what she expected to find, only that something within this space was waiting for her. As she stepped into the narrow gap between the two formations, the air shifted. The space was deeper than it looked, forming a natural pathway hidden from view. She followed the path as it curved, revealing a small opening carved into the back wall of the rock. Her heartbeat quickened. She knelt to look closer. The opening was just wide enough for a person to crawl through, and inside she could see old wooden beams supporting the entrance, weathered but still intact. A makeshift shelter or hiding place? Someone had built this with purpose. She hesitated. The discovery made her feel both uneasy and drawn in. The journals had hinted at meetings, at hidden struggles her grandfather had shielded from his family. Was this where he had come when he needed secrecy? Or had this place belonged to someone else who had come looking for him? She sat back on her heels and took a steadying breath. She wasn't ready to crawl inside, not without understanding more. She rose to her feet and stepped away from the gap, glancing around the hills for signs that someone else might be nearby. The land looked empty, but emptiness on ranch land often held more beneath the surface than anyone realized. The gelding suddenly lifted his head and snorted sharply, staring toward the distant tree line. She followed his gaze and felt her stomach tighten. A faint shape moved near the trees, too far to identify clearly, but large enough to be a person on foot. Whoever it was didn't move any closer and didn't turn away. They just stood there, watching the hills. She felt a cold ripple run along her spine. The crunch she had heard outside the house, the uneasy sense of being observed, the carved initials in the barn, the hidden shelter between the rocks. The pieces felt like a puzzle she had barely begun to see clearly. She placed her hand on the gelding's neck to calm him, though she was the one who needed steadying. The figure near the trees stepped back until it disappeared behind the shadows. She scanned the area again, but nothing moved now. The quiet settled again, but it wasn't comforting. It felt expectant, as though the land waited for her next choice. She decided she needed more information before exploring the hidden space. She mounted up and rode toward the far edge of the property where the older ranch hands had once lived. Their cabins were long abandoned, but her grandfather had mentioned them in his journals more than once. Maybe they held answers she had overlooked. The cabins appeared after a long ride across rough land, their roofs dipped from years of wind and sun. She tied the gelding to a post and approached the first cabin. When she pushed the door open, dust drifted into the air like faded memories. Inside, old tools lay scattered and a single lantern sat on the table. She stepped around carefully, not wanting to disturb the space too much. She noticed a small trunk tucked beneath a cot. She dragged it out and opened it. Inside she found letters bundled with twine. She untied them and skimmed through the faded ink. The letters weren't from her grandfather. They were written by a man who once worked alongside him. The man described troubles with strangers showing up at the ranch, asking questions about business deals and land ownership. He wrote about warnings her grandfather had given him, about protecting certain information no matter what. One line caught her attention. It read, "The girl must know someday, but only when she can carry the truth." She dropped the letter slightly, feeling her breath catch. Could the girl mentioned be her? Had her grandfather expected her arrival long before she inherited the ranch? The weight of that thought settled heavily on her shoulders. She placed the letters back into the trunk and checked a second cabin. Inside, she found a ledger with her grandfather's handwriting. The entries were brief but clear. He had been trying to protect something on the ranch, something more valuable than land or livestock, something he feared others would come for. As she flipped through the ledger, she felt footsteps outside, light, cautious. Her heart hammered as she stepped back from the door, listening closely. The footsteps stopped right outside, and the shadow of someone passed over the thin crack of light at the bottom of the door. She remained still, every sense sharpened. After a moment, the footsteps retreated. When she finally stepped outside, the figure was already distant, walking toward the hills she had just left, the same person from before. This time she felt certain they were following her. Her instinct urged her to ride home quickly, but another part of her knew she couldn't keep running from questions. The ranch held secrets her grandfather had once carried alone, and she had inherited them whether she felt ready or not. She could not let fear drive her back into silence. She rode after the figure, not too close but keeping sight of the shadow moving ahead. The tension rose with every step, a tight pull between fear and responsibility. She didn't call out, afraid her voice might startle him or draw unwanted attention. Instead, she watched him climb toward the rocks, toward the hidden space she had discovered earlier. By the time she reached the ridge, the figure was gone again, lost somewhere among the stones. She checked the narrow gap between the rocks. The opening looked untouched, but she felt certain someone had been there recently. She crouched down and ran her fingers along the ground near the entrance. Fresh tracks, someone had gone inside. A deep breath filled her lungs. She knew what this meant. The truth wasn't buried anymore. Someone else was searching for the same answers, and they were ahead of her. She stood at the entrance of the hidden opening, the sun dipping behind the hills, casting long shadows that stretched across the land. Her heartbeat thudded in her ears. She felt the weight of the ranch, her grandfather's memory, the unanswered secrets, and the unknown figure lurking just ahead. She stepped closer to the entrance, ready to face whatever waited inside, knowing that the next choice would pull her straight toward the heart of everything her grandfather had tried to protect. The first light of morning settled across the hills as she stood in the center of the old ranch yard, breathing in the cold air and waiting for whatever came next. The storm from the night before had passed, leaving everything washed and bright, as if the land itself wanted to give her a clean start. She held the folded letter in her hand, the one that had changed everything when she discovered the real plans behind the land dispute. Now the truth was out, and it felt like life was finally offering a path forward instead of shoving her toward another cliff. She watched the barn doors swing open as the ranch hands stepped out, all of them glancing her way with something new in their eyes. It was respect mixed with relief, a quiet acknowledgement of the fight she had carried through. They had seen her stand her ground against people who believed they could scare her off, and she had shown that she was not leaving her grandfather's ranch no matter how heavy the struggle became. The land mattered not only because of its history, but because it held stories that begged to be carried into the future. She understood that now in a way she never had before. When the older hand approached with a warm smile, she felt the weight she had been carrying slowly lift. He told her the herd was calm again, the fences held, and everything was safe after the trouble from the night before. She thanked him, feeling a stronger sense of belonging than she ever imagined she would hear. It was strange how a place dismissed by her family had become the one she was willing to protect with everything she had. She wondered if her grandfather had known she would find herself this way. The thought softened her heart. As she walked across the yard toward the house, she saw the man who had helped her through the hardest parts of the journey leaning by the porch rail. His steady gaze met hers, carrying both worry and hope. He had seen her face danger she never expected and had refused to let her face any of it alone. For a moment, neither of them said anything, letting the quiet morning fill the space between them. Then he nodded toward the envelope still in her hand, asking whether she was ready to share what she found. She sat beside him, feeling the warmth of the sun drying the last signs of the long night. She explained how the documents revealed the land's true value, the hidden deal her relatives had planned, and the way the threat against the ranch had been slowly building behind her back. He listened closely, letting her speak at her own pace. When she finally finished, he told her she had done exactly what her grandfather would have wanted. He said she had honored the ranch not by holding on with fear, but by standing with courage. Hearing that made her chest tighten with emotion. She realized she had been waiting for someone to say those words, even if she never admitted it. She had doubted herself for so long, believing she did not fit the life her grandfather left behind. But the land had taught her more than she expected, and the people around her had given her strength she did not think she had. It felt like the ranch had shaped her into someone new, someone more rooted and steady. The morning went on as she walked with him through the fields, checking on the horses that had panicked during the storm. Her mare trotted toward them, nudging her shoulder as if relieved she was safe. She ran her hand down the horse's neck, whispering thanks for leading her through the roughest night. That horse had been with her from the start, guiding her across canyons, open plains, and dangerous trails. It felt right that she would be here for this moment too. They reached the far pasture where the land opened wide, giving them a view of the hills stretching endlessly. He told her he had been thinking about staying on the ranch for good, helping her rebuild and turning the place into something strong again. The idea settled in her heart with surprising comfort. She realized she did not want to run this place alone. She had found support she did not expect, and she wanted that support to stay. She said she could use someone who understood the land the way he did, someone who cared about the ranch as much as she was learning to. She felt shy admitting it, but he smiled in a way that told her he already knew what she meant. Their partnership had grown in small steps, through long rides, shared struggles, and quiet moments after exhausting days. It made sense now in a way that felt both natural and hopeful. The rest of the ranch slowly came alive as the sun climbed higher. Workers moved across the fields, fixing what the storm had broken and returning life to normal. She realized how much these people trusted her now, how the ranch had become more than a duty. It had turned into a community built on shared effort and resilience. That alone made her feel she had made the right choice in staying. She spent part of the afternoon going through old trunks left in the house. Inside, she found letters her grandfather had written but never sent, talking about his hopes that she would one day discover the ranch for herself. He had believed she had the strength to carry on even when no one else did. Reading his words moved her deeply, filling her with a quiet joy she had not expected. It was like hearing his voice guide her one more time. Later, she walked outside to find the man waiting with news. The legal threat was officially gone. They had won. The ranch was secure. For a moment she stood still, letting the news sink in, feeling the tension she had carried for weeks finally break loose. She felt lighter, more free than she had been in years. She smiled, then laughed, unable to hold back the surge of relief. The workers around them cheered, the sound echoing across the land that had survived yet another challenge. That night, the ranch gathered for a simple celebration. There was music, home-cooked food, and the glow of lanterns swinging gently in the warm air. She looked around at the people who had become part of her life, and it felt like a new chapter opening right in front of her. The man who had supported her through everything stayed close, making sure she knew she did not have to face anything alone anymore. When the evening quieted, they walked out toward the fence line, where the sky stretched wide and full. She looked at the stars and realized how much had changed since the day she arrived. She had come thinking she was inheriting a burden, something forgotten and unwanted. Instead, she found a legacy worth fighting for, a community that believed in her, and a sense of purpose she had never known before. He asked her what she planned to do next. She said she wanted to rebuild the ranch just the way her grandfather dreamed of, but with new ideas too. She wanted to open the land to families, travelers, and anyone searching for peace. She wanted the ranch to feel alive again. He told her he would be there with her every step, and she believed him. As the two of them stood together watching the sky, she felt the future rising around her like a promise. The ranch had given her a second chance, and she was ready to honor it. The past was finally at peace, the present was steady, and the future felt bright. It was the kind of ending she never expected but knew she had earned. The land had found its rightful keeper, and she had found where she truly belonged.